The pool shimmered under the late afternoon sun, its surface rippling like liquid gold. I'd always found it to be a sanctuary of sorts, a place to escape the monotony of daily life. But today, as I adjusted my towel on the lounge chair, the usual serenity felt charged with an unfamiliar energy. That energy had a name, Ella. Ella, my neighbor's cousin, had arrived the previous week, turning the quiet rhythm of the cul-de-sac on its head. Her laughter carried through the open windows, her voice laced with a husky charm that felt like summer distilled into sound. When my neighbor mentioned she'd be staying for a while, I hadn't thought much of it, but now, watching her glide through the water like a sleek shadow, I couldn't tear my eyes away. She surfaced with a gasp, brushing water from her face, her eyes finding mine as if she knew I'd been watching. "Nice day, huh?" she called out, her voice carrying over the gentle splash of the pool. "Perfect. And now," I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Perfect," I managed to reply, though the word felt inadequate for what I was feeling. Ella tilted her head, a smile playing on her lips. She swam to the edge nearest to me, her arms resting on the tiles as she leaned forward. Her gaze held mine, unflinching, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us. "You're not coming in?" she asked, her tone light, but laced with something deeper. I shook my head, trying to play it cool. "Not much of a swimmer." Her smile widened, a slow curve that felt like a challenge. "Suit yourself," she said, pushing off the edge with a grace that made my pulse quicken. I tried to focus on anything else, the way the sunlight dappled the water, the distant hum of cicadas, but my attention kept drifting back to her. Ella moved through the pool with effortless elegance, her every motion a study in fluidity. When she climbed out, water streaming down her tanned skin, I knew I was in trouble. She grabbed a towel, wrapping it loosely around herself before walking over to where I sat. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, not waiting for an answer as she sank into the chair beside me. "Not at all," I said, though my heart was racing. Up close, she was even more striking. Her wet hair clung to her neck, droplets tracing paths along her collarbone. I tried not to stare, but she caught me anyway, her smile turning mischievous. "You're awfully quiet," she remarked, tilting her head to study me. Not what I expected. I blinked, caught off guard. "What did you expect?" Her eyes glinted with amusement. "Someone more chatty. You seemed outgoing when we met." I shrugged, struggling to find my footing in the conversation. Guess you caught me on a good day." Ella laughed, a low melodic sound that sent a shiver through me. Well, I'll take it as a compliment. I like surprises. The way she said it, her voice dropping just enough to make the words linger, sent my thoughts spiraling. I knew I should look away, create some distance, but I couldn't. There was something magnetic about her, a pull I didn't know how to resist. We talked for a while, the conversation flowing easily despite my initial awkwardness. She had a way of drawing you in, making you feel like the only person in the world. And when her laughter rang out, it was impossible not to join in, even as my chest tightened with the growing weight of unspoken tension. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the pool in shades of amber and rose, Ella stretched out on her lounge chair. Her towel slipped slightly, revealing more of her sun-kissed skin. I forced myself to look away, focusing instead on the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, the chirping of cicadas growing louder with the fading light. "You're awfully serious," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Her voice was soft, but carried an edge of teasing. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer without giving too much away. "Nothing important," I said finally, though my heart told a different story. Ella didn't seem convinced. She propped herself up on one elbow, her gaze sharp and curious. "I don't believe you," she said simply, her lips curling into a sly smile. "You've got that look, like you're hiding something." Her words hit too close to home, and I laughed, nervously, hoping to deflect. "Maybe I just don't want to bore you." "Bore me?" she repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Trust me, you couldn't if you tried." "No, I couldn't because I talk to myself all of the time, and if puking or gagging was one of the things that alarmed me, there it was again. That undercurrent in her tone, the subtle challenge that made my pulse quicken. I looked at her then, really looked, and found her staring back at me with an intensity that left no room for misinterpretation. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world around us seemed to fade, the sounds of the evening retreating into the background. It was just her, her gaze holding mine, and the unspoken question hanging between us. Ella broke the silence first, her voice softer now. "Do you ever think about what it would be like to just let go?" The question caught me off guard, and I wasn't sure how to respond. Um, let go of what? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. I knew the moment of truth. I knew his crucifying like. She shrugged, her gaze drifting to the pool before returning to me. Of expectations, rules, all the things that keep us from doing what we really want. My heart was pounding now, the weight of her words pressing against me. "I guess I haven't thought about it much," I lied, my voice quieter than I intended. Ella's smile was faint, almost wistful. "Maybe you should," she said simply. The conversation shifted after that, but the tension lingered, crackling like static in the air. When Ella suggested we take a swim to cool off, I hesitated, but the way she looked at me, half challenge, half invitation, made it impossible to say no. The water was warm, the day's heat lingering even as the sky darkened. We swam lazily, the distance between us shrinking with every pass. At first, we talked about nothing: movies, music, places we'd been, but the casual banter did little to ease the tension that had been building all day. At one point, Ella floated on her back, her arms spread wide as she gazed up at the stars. "It's beautiful out here," she said, her voice almost dreamy. "It is," I agreed, though my attention was fixed on her, the way her hair fanned out around her in the water, the way her skin glowed in the moonlight. She turned her head then, catching me mid-stare. Her smile was slow, knowing. "You don't have to keep your distance, you know." My throat tightened and I wasn't sure how to respond. "Ella," she swam closer, her movements languid, unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. When she stopped in front of me, barely an arm's length away, the air between us felt charged, the tension almost unbearable. "You can tell me to stop," she said softly, her gaze searching mine. "But I don't think you will." Her words sent a shiver through me, and for a moment I was frozen, caught between the part of me that wanted to hold on to reason and the part that wanted to let it go. Ella reached out then, her fingers brushing lightly against my arm, and it was as if a dam broke inside me. I closed the distance between us in one swift motion, my hands finding her waist as her arms wrapped around my neck. Her lips met mine in a kiss that was both tentative and electric, a spark igniting into a flame. The world around us disappeared, the water rippling softly against our moments as we lost ourselves in the moment. Ella's hands moved to my shoulders, her touch firm yet gentle, as if she were trying to memorize the feel of me. My own hands tightened around her waist, pulling her closer, the warmth of her body against mine, grounding me even as my thoughts spiraled. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine, her eyes half closed. "I knew you wouldn't tell me to stop," she murmured, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Her smile widened, and she leaned in to kiss me again, slower this time, as if savoring every second. The tension between us, once so unbearable, had melted into something else, something deeper, more certain. As we held each other in the quiet of the pool, the world seemed to stand still, the stars above us the only witnesses to what we had just shared. It was a moment I knew I would never forget, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. And, for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. The world around us seemed to blur into insignificance as Ella and I lingered in the water, our breaths mingling, hearts pounding in unison. Her fingertips traced gentle patterns on my shoulder, each touch leaving a trail of warmth that sunk deep into my skin. It was surreal. This moment, that had once felt so impossible, now unraveling with breathtaking clarity. "I've always wondered about you," she said softly, her voice carrying over the quiet lapping of the water against the pool's edge. Her lips curled into a faint smile, one that hinted at secrets untold. "From the first time I saw you, I thought you seemed like someone who kept a lot hidden." I hesitated, her words tugging at something I hadn't yet found the courage to admit. "And what did you think I was hiding?" Ella tilted her head, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. "Things like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hmm?" Moments like this. Her confession was as much an invitation as it was a revelation, and it struck a chord deep within me. The careful walls I had built around myself over time suddenly felt fragile, barely able to withstand the weight of her gaze. I wasn't sure what to say. What could I say that wouldn't pale in comparison to the truth I could see so clearly in her eyes? Instead of answering, I reached for her, my hand settling against the curve of her waist. Her skin was warm beneath my touch, impossibly soft, and as I pulled her closer, her breath hitched, her body leaning into mine. The space between us dissolved once again, and when her lips met mine, it was slower this time, less about urgency and more about exploration. Her hands slid to my chest, her fingers splaying wide, as if she were trying to map the contours of my body. I found myself mirroring her movements, my hands trailing from her waist to the small of her back, savoring the way she shivered beneath my touch. It was a delicate dance, this unspoken exchange, and yet it felt as though we'd been moving to this rhythm all along. "You don't make anything easy, do you?" I murmured against her lips, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Ella laughed softly, the sound low and melodic, sending a pleasant warmth coursing through me. "And you love it," she countered, her voice playful yet laced with undeniable truth. I couldn't argue, not when the way she looked at me, like I was the only thing in her world that mattered, left me utterly defenseless. Her hands slid to the back of my neck, her fingers tangling in my hair as she drew me closer, the tension between us building once more. "Come with me," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. Her words sent a shiver racing down my spine, and I nodded, unable to resist the pull of her voice. "I've spent so much time doing what everyone else expected of me," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "For once, I want to do something for me." Her honesty struck me like a bolt of lightning, leaving me breathless. There was a vulnerability in her words, an unspoken plea for understanding, and it made me realize just how much this moment meant to her. To us. You deserve that, I said, my voice low but resolute. You deserve everything. Her smile was small but genuine, and she stepped closer, her hands sliding to my waist. Then let's stop thinking so much, she murmured, her tone filled with quiet determination. Let's just feel. I didn't have time to respond before her lips found mine again, her kiss igniting a fire that burned away the last remnants of doubt. My hands found her hips, pulling her flush against me, as we surrendered to the pull that had been building between us for days, maybe even longer. Time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once, each moment bleeding into the next, as we lost ourselves in the quiet intensity of what we had found. The air around us felt thick with anticipation, every touch, every sigh, every whispered word adding to the tension that threatened to consume us. When she pulled away, her breath shallow, her gaze locked on mine, it was as though the world had stopped spinning. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I needed to hear it, needed to know that this wasn't just a fleeting moment for her. Her smile was soft but unwavering. "I've never been more sure." Her words were all the reassurance I needed. I leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both tender and unyielding. A silent promise that whatever this was, it was ours. As the stars above us continued their silent vigil, we crossed a line that neither of us could, or wanted, to come back from. The night deepened around us, the air warm and heavy with a palpable tension that neither of us could deny. Every movement, every touch, felt magnified by the stillness of the world outside the cocoon we had created. Ella's hands trailed down my arms, her fingers weaving into mine, as if she were anchoring herself in this moment. Her eyes, dark and searching, held 1,000 unspoken words, each one resonating in the quiet space between us. "Come here," she murmured, her voice soft but insistent. There was no hesitation in her tone, only a quiet certainty that drew me closer. I followed her lead, letting her guide me to the lounge chair where she'd tossed her towel earlier. She sat, pulling me down beside her, and the intimacy of the moment stole the air from my lungs. The faint glow of the pool lights reflected in her eyes, and I found myself captivated by the way she looked at me, like I was the only thing that mattered in the entire world. I chuckled softly, the sound low and uneven. "I don't usually find myself in situations like this," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly under the weight of the moment. Ella's smile widened, and she leaned in, her lips brushing against mine, in a kiss that was both gentle and deliberate. "Maybe it's time you did," she murmured, her words a soft echo against my skin. There was a boldness to her that left me breathless, a confidence that both intimidated and fascinated me. She seemed so sure of herself, so unapologetically present, and it made me want to match her, to meet her where she was. My hands found her waist, pulling her closer as her arms wrapped around my neck, her fingers threading through my hair. The kiss deepened, our movements slow and deliberate, as if we were savoring every second. Her body pressed against mine, warm and soft and impossibly close, and I felt my pulse race, each beat a drum echoing in my ears. Her hands moved with purpose, her touch exploring, mapping the planes of my shoulders, my back, as if she were memorizing every inch of me. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The quiet hum of the night, the faint ripple of water in the pool, it all faded into the background, leaving only us, entwined in a moment that felt both infinite and fleeting. Ella pulled back just enough to rest her forehead against mine, her breath warm against my cheek, her lips brushing against my cheek in a gesture so tender it left me trembling. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice laced with genuine concern. It was a small question, but it carried the weight of everything between us. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "more than okay." Her smile returned, softer this time, and she leaned in to kiss me again. Slower, deeper, as if she were savoring every second. My hands slid to the small of her back, pulling her closer, and the warmth of her body against mine was enough to make my head spin. There was a quiet intensity to her movements, a deliberateness that made every touch, every kiss, feel like a revelation. My hand slid to the small of her back, pulling her closer, and the warmth of her body against mine. As we shifted, the towel beneath us slipped slightly, and Ella laughed softly, the sound low and melodic. "Guess I didn't think this through," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't think either of us did." Her laughter faded, replaced by a quiet seriousness as she looked at me, her gaze searching mine. "But you don't regret it, do you?" The question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't thought about it, but because the answer came so easily. "No," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "Not for a second." Ella's expression softened, and she leaned in to kiss me again, her lips warm and familiar against mine. The tension between us melted away, replaced by something deeper, something quieter but no less intense. We moved together as if we'd done this 1,000 times before. Each touch, each kiss, a silent affirmation of what we had found in each other. The night stretched on, the minutes blending into hours, until the world outside seemed like a distant memory. The stars above us glimmered faintly, their light reflected in the still surface of the pool, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt completely at peace. When Ella finally pulled back, her breath shallow, her cheeks flushed, she rested her head against my shoulder, her arms draped loosely around my neck. "You know this changes everything, right?" she said softly, her voice a quiet whisper in the stillness. I nodded, my fingers tracing lazy patterns along her back. "Yeah," I said, my voice low but certain. "I know." And it did. In that moment, I knew there was no going back, no pretending that this hadn't happened, that we hadn't crossed a line we could never uncross. But as I held her in the quiet of the night, her body warm and steady against mine, I realized I didn't want to. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or complications this would bring, it was worth it. She was worth it. We sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the silence between us filled with unspoken promises. The world around us slowly began to stir, the faint glow of dawn creeping over the horizon. But neither of us moved. For the first time, we weren't running from anything, weren't hiding. We were just here, together, and that was enough. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the pool, Ella lifted her head, her gaze meeting mine. Her smile was small but genuine, and she reached up to brush her fingers against my cheek. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "I don't regret this." It was her warm smile that overcame me from loss. "Me neither," I replied, my voice steady despite the tightness in my throat. Her smile widened, and she leaned in to kiss me one last time, a kiss that was both a goodbye and a promise of more to come. And as the sun rose, casting the world in golden light, I realized that whatever lay ahead, I was ready to face it. Because in her, I had found something real, something worth holding on to.